Well, in South Africa, some publications said that 2015 was the year of the student. There were countrywide protests that brought the country to a standstill for a couple of days. Protests started suddenly at Wits University in Johannesburg. Students rallied together against fee increases, which were at that point above 10%, spread across the country. Students held firm, and eventually their demands for affordable education were met. The minister said we'll have a 6% increase instead of a 10% increase, and such was the pressure, often driven by social media, massive demonstrations, some violence. The government gave in and said no fee increases this year. Now, this obviously has huge implications for the university budgets. They've got to pay their bill, so they're going to be 10% short of what their budgeted income was for this year, and the government's now trying to find a way. And I think, Bonnie and Esther, this has changed the discourse in South Africa in the sense if that issue can mobilize such support, often using social media and very well planned tactically, it wasn't just a wildfire that started, what implication will this have for other political agendas, other mass movements to put pressure on government? So it really has changed the way we think about young people, about education. Bonnie, what's the position in Kenya? Let's start with you. I mean, government funding of university fees, there's never enough money, we know that. What's the politics and what's the reality there?
Right, David, fees must fall, but, well, they didn't fall, they stayed where they were. In the Kenyan situation, David, the government has a system, it's called the Higher Education Loans Board, that advances loans to students that they will pay upon graduation. This is where we've had the contention. So we didn't see an all blown out reaction going to the streets and whatnot, but they've been picketing regarding an increase into these allocations. Obviously, the big challenge has been delays because those people who graduated have been having challenges paying back with very high default rates, as well as the Higher Education Loans Board having inability to trace these people, seeing as there's very little or no documentation of where you are or who is employing you. So that has been obviously a big challenge, but sustainability is still a big question there. Esther?
Yeah, but it's a slightly different situation in Nigeria. We don't exactly have student loans. Every year, the lecturers complain about the fact that many of the universities are underfunded. When it comes to research and development, that's near zero, at least for many of the universities. And whenever issues come up regarding the universities, it's usually about salaries, unpaid salaries, or lecturers complaining about being underpaid. And for the students, it's about amenities within the school, or the fact that the lecturers are going on strike or facing off with the government. So we usually have pockets of that happening sometimes from year to year, but it usually just ends up with dialogue between the Senior Staff Association or the lecturers of a particular university and the government.
Yeah, I'm interested to know, Bonnie and Esther, to what extent has the social media influenced these debates? Because as I say, in South Africa, of course, no one wants fees to go up, but this year, for the first time, the mobilization was, I think, for the government quite disturbing. Bonnie?
David, Kenyans on Twitter have been known to be very feisty and in terms of their reactions and voicing their opinions. So obviously this has been a big part of what drives these conversations. They drive conversations, and incidentally, the leaders listen to them. A lot of the reactions, a lot of the interventions have come on account of a very massive social media campaign. So in Kenya, it sits right at the driver's seat.
Well, thanks, Bonnie. Just wrapping up that fees story. Lots of dimensions to it with political implications for the broader discourse, not just education there. Well, the ratings agencies are often on our minds. Some people say they shouldn't be given the attention that they are, but they govern borrowing rates, they govern investment by the big funds, so you can't ignore them. Now, Moody's outlook for South Africa's local and foreign currency credit rating changed from stable to negative on Wednesday, and according to Moody's, the country's weak growth, the growing risk of fiscal declines and political pressures were the reasons for that change. So what does it mean for South Africa's economic outlook? We go back to Dino Voulakis in Cape Town. Dino, I suppose the question you ask, it's a little bit like the rand when it moves. You say, what has actually influenced this? It's impossible to measure it mathematically. One wonders if the finance minister crisis hadn't been resolved as it was, where we had 3 ministers in a week. If Pravin Gordhan had not been restored to the Treasury, one wonders if the Moody's rating would have been harsher. In other words, what I'm asking you is, how much is political in the sense of the last 10 days in terms of perceptions of our investment rating, And how much is the stuff that's there anyway?
David, it's critical that confidence be maintained despite the challenges. So what ratings agencies seemingly look at and confirm, and typically markets do move ahead of it, is they try to quantify the current climate together with a vision of what is to come. And in order to maintain a rating, or in fact improve on the rating, in order to bring financing and borrowing costs down, one needs to have clear forecastability, clear sight of what is to be expected from the economy going forward. And clearly, the developments of last week compromised to the extent that, yes, had we not seen a remedial action taken, certainly most all the rating agencies would have responded. And indeed, they may just need to review again, and far sooner than is expected, depending on the impact that this political tryst has had. And here we specifically look at the bond market. It weakened, so your long-term borrowing rates, if you want to use the R186 as a proxy, rallied to about just under 1050. It's now back down to 930, but it's certainly not close to the 6.5% it was 3 years ago. So yeah, our borrowing costs have been heightened as a result of not only the political developments, but also the general weaker economic condition that South Africa faces.
Dino, I would just like to find out how much attention should we give to these ratings, because looking at the Kenyan and indeed the Nigerian situation, whenever we are downgraded, we always say we can forget about the ratings, but whenever we get an A+ or a BB, that's when we accept them. How much a deal should they play ideally?
Indeed, it almost seems as if it's a relief when a change comes through, and that change is the expected change. So certainly in the case of South Africa, we are on the two, Fitch and S&P, a notch away from junk. That does have some very real implications for South Africa, because it does mean a forced sell for a lot of the funds, foreign financiers that are, from a prudential point of view, restricted to investing only in investment-grade instruments. And so one would see a forced sell of positions on a downgrade. But I suppose once you're downgraded to junk, you then, the economy and the prospect needs to ride on its own merits. So I think it's critical when you're flirting with the outer parameters, if you like, of ratings. So this is the challenge that South Africa faces. You could argue that if we don't see meaningful improvement in our economic prospects, and this speaks to the bottlenecks that need to be resolved within our economy, that the next rating will be a downgrade, that we will move into junk, and that will have some very real implications for capital markets here in South Africa, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dino. And now another break, and after that we're going to find out more about the man who changed Nigeria's history, Muhammadu Buhari.
Okay, we've got all the teams from the bureaus on a single discussion today. Now let's focus on Nigeria. The political landscape has been on the forefront of events this year as the 2015 general elections in Nigeria saw the emergence of Muhammadu Buhari as president of Nigeria. Nigeria's stock market reacted by recording the biggest one-day gain in history. Now, since then, the president has embarked on stiff anti-corruption drives that has seen the former National Security Advisor charged for corruption and abuse of office. So that's where we're going to take the conversation from here, and looking at how the Nigerian democracy political landscape has changed since Buhari took power in May. Let me start with you, Pabina. We've seen a lot happening when President Buhari took office. He talked a lot about how he's going to fight insecurity. That's talking about Boko Haram. He talked about how he was going to go after treasury looters that allegedly stole billions from the treasuries. And that's what we've seen playing out in the course of the year, before we began to see, the economy faltering, and then that conversation we had to focus on the economy. But from your perspective, let's just talk about how things have changed or have played out since he took power.
Buhari's ascension to the presidency of Nigeria is unprecedented. We've never had an incumbent lose an election before. So, and it's also the first time, and for the first time since our democracy in 1999, that an opposition is coming into power. So it needed a bit of a transition. But what is interesting is to see is that this government has come in with a bit more focus than previous administrations. And it comes into a time when Nigeria is in probably its biggest economic challenge since the early 80s. So what the government has done is to try and address Nigeria's issue from the root cause. Corruption is a big problem in Nigeria. If you recall, one of the disadvantages that the Jonathan administration had was that it didn't pay enough attention to corruption. But the Buhari government is intent on really cutting corruption to a various minimum. You can't get rid of it. There will always be corruption. But addressing it is very important, because it really eats at the very fabric of what the Nigerian economy really is. Again, when you look at it, there is still the focus on the economy, but you still have to focus on the social aspect of the country. Unemployment is very high, so the government is focusing on how it could create jobs, how it could grow the economy, and of course the fight against corruption really is key. We like the progress thus far, and we just hope that they move faster even as we go into 2016.
Okay.
Fabina,
David,
Esther, if I could come in there. Thanks, Esther. Just to come back to that MTN story, it seemed to become a political story when there was an announcement that the state president would decide what would happen, and he then appears to have sent the ball back to the regulators to decide on the fine. So what seemed to be a commercial regulatory issue became a political issue. There were people in South Africa who said, is Nigeria still friendly to investment and business? Well, obviously they would want to be. So how has the new president changed the atmosphere in terms of doing business in Nigeria for the better?
What the president has done is to try and put Nigeria in a position where business should be done ethically, business should be done correctly. So that is why you see that the president has, to a large extent, not really interfered with the fine that the NCC has given to MTN. It is important to note that if you must fix corruption, you must build good institutions. And if you also see across board, what the president has done is allow many of the government institutions to function, allow them to do what they really need to do. So beyond the MTN fine, you're also seeing other regulators really step up. For example, the central bank fined some of the banks lately that didn't remit the TSA as when they should. And you also have the Food and Drug Administration also fined Guinness for not taking proper measure to secure some of its raw materials. So what you're seeing across board is a strengthening of regulatory institutions, and we think this is positive for business going forward.
Certainly, we can read a lot that is similar in East Africa, especially with the Magufuli effect in next door Tanzania. But I'd like to put this question to Duncan here. Duncan, looking at Magufuli, looking at President Buhari, how much of a change in regime, how does it affect a country's growth plans? Because we have long-term plans, but very short regimes of 5 years each.
Yeah, sure. We've seen two regime changes this year, Buhari and Magufuli, which are very historic. And what they're bringing to the table, ideally, in the economies is, one, let's cut wastage, let's cut any leakages through corruption. Let's also focus on creating jobs and stabilizing the economies. So these are the main fundamental bedrock where any economy needs to grow on, where you need, first of all, to make sure that the economy is up, jobs are being created, we don't have leakages through corruption. So both both of them actually seem to approach it from the same angle and trying also to bring in the level of accountability, the level of transparency into governance, because ideally all governance should be based on that. Now, this is something which all across all other leaders now looking to emulate. We see even back here in Kenya, there's a new war against corruption, bringing in even private sector. We've seen several executives of private companies, which are publicly listed rather, coming to declare their wealth, and the private sector is now even key on not partnering with anyone found within the corrupt framework. Right. So ideally, it's new and a new era and a new chapter of governance. And thanks to Buhari and Magufuli, who are now actually showing the African leaders that ideally this is a war that we can win. There's a lot that goes into it.
There's a lot of place for politics and business.
Exactly, because ideally you reach a point where the private-public partnership come in, and that's the order of the day in growing any economy.
Interesting.
Well, let's just get a final comment on that political aspect from Dino. Just wrapping up the show, Dino, just a quick comment there.
Yes.
Carry on.
Yes, certainly. Looking at our significant challenges in South Africa, that being high levels of unemployment, poverty and inequality, that if we're to address it efficiently and as quickly as possible, corruption needs to be rooted out, because it's a misappropriation of resources that can otherwise be applied. So it's very encouraging to see that the continent's largest economy, Nigeria, that the leadership there is cognizant of corruption, of healthy institutions, and the very real impact that it can have if these issues are addressed and hopefully rooted out. And in South Africa, we're doing that work as well. You've seen the new Minister of Finance committing himself to examining the misappropriation of resources, and we're encouraged by that.
Well, that's where we have to end our joint discussion between East, West and South this morning. It's been great having everyone in the studios together. Thanks to Dino Volakis. You've just been listening to him. He's the portfolio manager at Nedbank Private Wealth in South Africa. Duncan Lumwamu, senior investment analyst at Saiton Investments in Nairobi. And Pabina Yenkere, head of research at Vertiva in Lagos. And of course, great to work with Esther and Bonnie again on the show this morning. So do catch Power Lunch at 12 Central African time. CNBC Africa continues to look at the biggest events from 2015, including South Africa's finance minister debacle, the great fall of China, and Barack Obama's visit to East Africa. So goodbye to Bonnie and Esther. Good working with you again, as I say, Bonnie and Esther.
Yeah, good to see you again, David, and obviously we should do this again.
Yeah, we should do it every day. Bonnie, cheers to you, but you must wear a tie next time.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
You must wear a tie next time. Make an effort, okay?